Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My name is Clayton Craddock, and today's guest is Josh Samuels. Is the man. He is the king. Can't say enough good things about him. I use those words sparingly, but this guy is the man, and you'll find out why right now. Welcome.
First of all, it's that beautiful voice, man. That's why you're getting so much traction with these podcasts. Oh my goodness.
Thank you, man. It's all those Barry White records I grew up listening to. But I won't be speaking like that to you.
Oh, I love it. Please. It gets me in the mood.
Play a flam, my brother. Play a flam. Flamadiddles are what turns me. No, stop. Hey, man. So I know you live in New Jersey now. Did you grow up in New Jersey?
No, sir. I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in California.
Oh, really?
I grew up in California. I was very fortunate at a young age because my uncle is Dave. It was the late, great Dave Samuels, who passed away, unfortunately. It was a little over a year ago, maybe almost 2 years now. But I was very fortunate. He lived in New York, Connecticut while I was growing up, but he would often come around with a lot of his projects, the Caribbean Jazz Project, stuff that he was doing in California, and I would get lessons from him. Very young age. He was teaching me vibes and mallets and theory. Oftentimes I think about those times and I was real young, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And sometimes I think to myself, man, I really wish I had paid a little bit more attention because that guy was the master. And he would try to teach me theory things and I would just listen and look at him and go, but you're a kid. So I try to honor him as much as I can and be the best musician I can be.
Watching him play was your first musical memory? What was the thing that was that the thing that said, you know what, I want to play drums and percussion?
No, actually, when I started, my mom got me lessons on drum set when I was 2.5. I started playing. And I was in this dance and singing group that toured around California when I was about 3, 4, 5. I was doing these singing shows as a young kid with this dance and jingle group for children. And it was really early on about then that I knew that I was going to be a performer. The difference was that it's a very interesting story because there were always two sides of Josh. There was the musician side, which was always playing drums, playing piano, playing music, etc. And then there was performing. And all throughout my life, there were two separate things. There was like me on stage, and then there was me in doing orchestra, drums, bands, all that stuff. And it wasn't until very late in life, not late in life, but later on, I realized that was my calling, that I should actually put them together. Because in middle school, high school, I was doing all the honor orchestras and I got to play with the LA Phil. When I was in high school, there was like an LA Phil honor orchestra that I got to play in. But during that time, I was also on stage doing community theater, doing shows at my high school, and I wasn't a very good performer. I wasn't a great singer, I should say, but I loved it. I loved doing it. And even in high school, I remember all of my friends in the bands and orchestras, they'd be in the pit and I'd be on stage. And it never occurred to me, never occurred to me to think, oh, maybe I should be in the pit playing the music. It was just always separate. And then it was the same thing in college. I would do shows and I would play in the orchestra and play in my bands. And then after college, I started working on cruise ships. And when I worked on cruise ships, to be honest, the quality of musicianship on the cruise ships wasn't very high. And because of that, I became music director of the entire ship at 21. But that was when I realized, because that's when the bands were playing in the pits and I started playing in the pits for the shows. And I went, my God, this is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do, because I was really good at music and I loved performing. And this was the perfect avenue for me. I went, wow, I can play my favorite shows, perform, and still be a part of theater and do what I do best.
And that's how you got Beetlejuice. Thank you for.
That's right.
And the next day, you moved to New York, got Beetlejuice. Thank you for joining me, Broadway. Man, sped through your life real quick. Hold on 1 second. Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
No, but that's fascinating, though. There's a lot that you said there. 2.5 is when you got your first drum set?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
My God.
Yeah,
What
I
did it
couldn't reach
have?
pedals.
What's that?
Couldn't reach the pedals. Couldn't reach the pedals.
Did it have like paper heads on it, or were they actually Remo drum
No,
heads?
it was a real kit. It was like a real like Tama Junior kit, but I couldn't even reach the pedals.
Wow.
You know, my mom would just teach me paradiddles. She says it to this day. She says, "I remember when you were 3, left, left, left." I'm like, okay, thanks, mom, thanks.
Is she a musician too?
She's a singer and a guitar player, not for a living, but yeah, oh yes, my very musical family, very musical.
Did you have specific drummers that you looked up to when you were younger? Like some top 5 drummers that you looked up to when you were younger, in your either at junior high or high school. I know it
Interesting.
probably
I mean,
evolved, but
oh, it definitely evolved. When I was in middle school, everybody was into like we were all into the fusion drummers, man. Like when I was growing up, we were listening to Vinnie Colaiuta and Steve Gadd and Dennis Chambers. I remember reading all about Dennis Chambers on Modern Drummer. Man, I used to get every single Modern Drummer. I used to sit in my room and just read through those, try to play some of the grooves. Do they still have that magazine?
yes, they do. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I think I might have told you in 1981 they had a Broadway drummers roundtable, and that was 40 years ago. And I was like, 40 years ago in August, and I was like, why don't they have something like that now? And now
Absolutely.
we do.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we'll have something in Modern Drummer moving forward with more features with Broadway drummers. But yes, I used to have the excuse me. I used to have a subscription as well. Mine started when they first started. I think they started in 77, 78. I had one in 79 all the way through the 90s. Then I gave all of my I think I had them in Connecticut at my parents' house, and I gave them to a colleague of ours, spreading the knowledge to other people. But yes, Modern Drummery. So you were reading it back in the 80s,
Oh
90s?
yeah, maybe late '80s, early '90s, middle school, high school.
Okay.
Oh, I loved that, man. I loved that magazine.
Did
What a resource for us,
did you play
before
in
the
any
internet.
did you play in
But
any like fusion bands back then?
yeah, oh yeah, I was always playing in a lot of those like a lot of fusion bands, a lot of funky music, a lot of Rush style groups. I remember my friend coming to school in like 7th grade. He had like Rush shaved into his head. We were like Rush fanatics, man. But then as in high school, I started getting into more of the experimental side, and I really enjoyed listening to John Fishman of Fish. He is a really phenomenal drummer, a really phenomenal musician. I listen to a lot of Dave Matthews Band as well. That guy, Carter Buford, he might be my favorite drummer of all time, Carter.
Oh,
It's just, and the reason is because it's where he places the notes. It's his pocket. It's so precise. It feels so good the way he plays. I remember going to so many Dave Matthews concerts, and I would just stare at him, and it was love at first sight, man. I just it's phenomenal playing. So I think I really started to model my drumming after those players, more pocket players.
there we go.
About that, more pocket players. But I remember one of the things that really influenced me actually in high school was I remember going to a master class with the late great Ed Shaughnessy, who was a great big band player. And I remember him, he was doing a lot of records at the time. That was like back when records were still rolling. I remember him saying something to the group like, hey, who practices over the bar fills and polyrhythms and like really crazy stuff? And everybody in the audience went, yeah, man, we're into that. We're into that shit. Excuse me. We're into that stuff. And oh,
It's fine.
and I was like, and he said, he turned to everybody, he said, I sit in my house and I put on that click and all I do is practice 2 and 4. And every time I go into that studio and I hit 2 and 4 right to that click, I'm making 500 bucks. So you all can go and practice your crazy polyrhythm over the bar fills. I'm going to keep the pocket, I'm going to keep the groove, and I'm going to keep making money. And I was like, damn, wow, man, that is an eye opener. So that was a
Fascinating.
big, yeah,
Wow.
yes, sir.
That's
Wow, what's
that's
going
that's
on?
great advice actually.
Yeah, so that was a big eye opener because we all grew up in that era of, oh man, I want to play as many notes as I can, and which was cool. But yeah, that's not the way to make money anymore. You can't make
Yeah,
money that way.
I found the fewer notes that I play, the more I get paid.
100%. The note to dollar ratio. 100%,
Yes.
man.
Yes. That's the new math, the new drum math.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Los Angeles. You went to college where?
I went to college at USC in California.
Oh, man. When I was in LA in 2018, out of doing the out of town trials for Ain't not out of town trials, but the out of town run for Ain't Too Proud. I did a lot of traveling around Los Angeles, and I eventually just I took the train. I didn't realize LA had underground and above ground trains. I'm like, this is like Earthquake Central, and there's like subways in Los Angeles. I'm like,
Yes.
people are taking it, and I did. I took a train down to USC, and it's massive, man. It's a big place. I
That
didn't get
was
a
a great
chance.
school.
Now, why USC and not some other school like Berkeley or North Texas State or Juilliard or some other place?
I did get into a lot of schools. Most of the schools that I applied to on the East Coast, I got into. But to tell you the honest truth, I was in love with a girl at the time in California, and I decided to stay in California to be with her. That's the honest truth. And I have a lot of teachers. My high school teacher still chastises me to this day, saying, "Hey, man, you should have gone to New York earlier." It's fine. It worked out fine, obviously. But I think if I had a better head on my shoulders then, I probably should have just gone to New York. But I went to USC. They were great. It was a good school. I got to take drum lessons with Ndugu. That
Oh,
was
wow.
pretty amazing. I was in the percussion program. I got to play with guys from the LA Phil, Raynard Carroll, and all those cats that were real heroes of mine. So the end all. But I certainly had my reasons to stay in California.
Now, in the beginning of our conversation, you were mentioning that there were things that you were doing that you saw people playing in the pit. When you were in LA, did you at what point did you say, you know what, I don't want to stay in LA anymore. I want to go to New York and try the whole Broadway thing.
So what ended up happening was I always knew that I wanted to be in theater. I just didn't know how I was going to do it, whether performing or playing or whatever. And I met a really good friend of mine in college who is a composer. And after all the cruise ship work that I did, a couple of contracts on the ships, I remember my friend, this composer, he started sending me all these shows that he was doing. And he was like, "Hey, man, put a drum part to this, put a drum part to this." So I would just go on Finale. I'd write these really great drum parts for him. And eventually he was like, "I'm doing a bunch of concerts of my music. Will you come out to New York and play these for me?" And I went, "Sure." And he's, "Come out, you can stay on my couch for a couple of weeks and you'll play these shows." And I wasn't planning on moving out to New York. I thought I was just coming out for a couple of weeks, but this guy was very well connected in the scene, is well connected in the scene. And he ended up introducing me to so many music directors that all of a sudden I had work for 3 months. Now, it wasn't necessarily paid work, let's say. I had done enough work on cruise ships that I had some money saved. So I could dick around and not have to worry about money at the moment and not have to a day job, that I could really just focus on playing as much as possible. And I was playing for 3 months and I stayed on his couch and I told my father, I said, "Damn, I guess start sending my stuff out." And my dad sent boxes. You like, just send a box of clothes, send a box of drums. Finally, I was like, "I need my drums, Dad." And he sent my drums. And that's how it started. I wasn't even moving to New York and I moved to New York. But the craziest thing, and this is what made me know that I was doing, or that let me know that I was doing the right thing, is on the third day I was in New York, my friend, this composer, told me, he said, he knew a lot of music directors, which is what he was introducing me to. And a lot of these music directors, I had long-term relationships with them. And we can go into that idea because I started working with a lot of these cats, mostly sometimes for free, sometimes for a very little amount of money. But as they got better and as they got more work, they would bring me along and I became more prominent in the scene. The third day, the one person my friend told me, he said, "Listen, I don't know any musicians here. I know music directors, but because I was going around the city, like putting up signs like, 'Hey, do you need a drummer? Do you need a drummer? Call Josh.'" This was like, this is basic stuff. I was doing anything I could to get work. And he said, "Listen, if you could get a hold of Gary Seligson, he's the only drummer I know. And maybe you could like talk to him about this stuff." And I was like, I remember I had a book of names with their numbers and his was the first name. And I said, "I got to meet this guy. I got to meet this guy." And on the third day, I was in the subway with my cymbals. I walk on the subway car and who's sitting there with his cymbals? Gary. And I go, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know a picture. I didn't have a picture of him. I didn't know, but I turned to him and I said, oh, you're on a gig too today, huh? And he said, yeah. And I said, I'm Josh. He said, I'm Gary. I went, Gary? And that's how I met Gary. And we ended up going out and chatting, and he hooked me up with Michael Kreuter from Avenue Q so I could go watch him. But that was the beginning of meeting people in the city. And that's when I went, wow, something's going on here. Maybe this is what I'm meant to do.
It's funny. Gary is like the sun, and everyone revolves around him. He gives out such great energy.
Yes.
Yeah, and just talking to him and realizing how many careers he's launched, including mine to a certain degree. Matt Beck is really the guy that brought me into this whole thing. But the first person I saw play in a Broadway pit was Gary Seligson at Aida. He said, come on down. I was like, okay. That just shows you how great of a person he is and how important to this business he is. So you
I think mine was the same. Was Billy Elliot. I think that was the first that I saw as well. He was like, hey, come watch me play Billy Elliot.
You met Gary, and then he recommended you for other things, or how did...
No, he didn't recommend me. No, it took a lot longer than that. He just got me in the scene and pointed me in the right direction. Basically, the whole thing is you just got to meet people. You just got to be cool, be a good guy, be fun to be around, and just meet people. And that was the whole thing. And I tell a lot of people, it's like really important when you come out, if you want to do this for a living, to have a little buffer. Like I said, because I had some money saved from the cruise ship. So I could spend every waking moment contacting musicians, contacting drummers, trying to meet up with Clayton. Like that was like my MO. That was my whole thing. That was my whole life. That's what I lived. That's what I did. And that's what you got to do. Because even now, when we all get called all the time for gigs, and if I can't do a gig, I'm always thinking about like a response. I always think about the person that I really last talked to almost. It was almost, oh yeah, yesterday this kid called me, he's new in the city. I'll throw him a bone. I'll throw this to him. So if you're constantly pushing and meeting people and keeping yourself in their minds, you'll get more work. And that's the job. Always emailing, always calling. Now, there's a skill in that because you don't want to be annoying. It's a people game. It's a people's game. You have to know how to approach people and figure out what pisses them off, what they want. Is it okay if I call Clayton on the phone? Would he rather me email him? Is he giving me vibes that maybe I should stop bugging him? Okay, that's cool. I won't email him for a little while. You definitely have to use your brain.
One of the things that my girlfriend talks about, because she is a career coach, and she talks about how to respond to people in the manner in which they want to be responded to. If they say, text me about this, or call me, or email me, then do that. Because if you say, text me back or about this, then you call them, you're like, then they hang up on you. They're like, I told you to text me.
100%.
So it's just, like you said, it's a people skills skill that people need to understand and manage. Going back to something that you talked about, we met through one of the things that you talked about was basically reaching out. How did you start reaching out to drummers on Broadway and percussionists in order to try to break in? What are some of the things that you did?
I learned very early on that joining the union was a good key. They had a lot of good resources. They had a lot of different things. And one of the things that they had that now I think is online. I think everything is online now, but at the time it wasn't. I went to the union and they printed out a packet for me of every single person on Broadway and their instruments. And so I was just able to email every single guy that I knew and just to meet with them. I wasn't trying to hustle for work. I wasn't trying to be a jerk or think that I was like all that or anything. I was just trying to meet people. And so that's what I did. And so that was one thing, was like meeting people that way and getting all those resources from 802 and cold calling people. But also another thing that I heard, which this isn't iffy, but to take lessons with some people that you really admire, that's tricky because you never want to put yourself in a situation where somebody feels that they are above you. because if someone goes to me for a lesson, they're now a student and I'm the teacher, and I'm not looking at them necessarily as equal, which is very important in this business. But at the time I was like, I want to get better with my hand drum stuff. And I knew Doug Hinrichs was doing In the Heights. I love that show. And I'm a big transcriber. I love transcribing. I used to transcribe people's solos. I used to transcribe Gad. I used to transcribe musical theater stuff. One of the things I transcribed was In the Heights. I just picked 5 or 6 tunes that I loved, the salsa number, the opening, the end of Act 1, and I transcribed it. And I brought it to Doug, and I started taking lessons with Doug. And it just so happened that there was an opening at In the Heights, and I was still making the rounds, and there was this other guy named Danny Taylor who was from a similar area of California, and he was doing a show called The Marvelous Wonderettes off Broadway at the time. And Doug asked Danny to sub for him In the Heights. And Danny asked Doug, he said, if I'm going to sub for you, I need to sub for Marvelous Wonderettes. What do I do? And Doug says, you know what? Why don't you use Josh? And that was the start. So that was like my first off-Broadway job. And that gave me a little bit of clout, because then when I met you, Clayton, I was at least able to say, hey man, I have something. I'm playing off-Broadway at Marvelous Wonderettes. And you were like, okay, ding, I'll remember that. And I got very lucky because you were such a good guy that when you left Altar Boys and Mo Roberts took over for you, you actually gave Mo Roberts my name, which got me into New World Stages, which upped my status a little bit in the scene.
How did you prepare to sub at that show?
I am insane when it comes to subbing. I'm very obsessive compulsive. I'm actually obsessive compulsive. Like, I've been diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. I'm very meticulous, and I have what they call perfectionistic OCD, which means I need to do everything perfectly. So when I sub, when you gave me your book for Altar Boys, I transcribed the crap out of what you were playing to a T. And I have always done that for any show that I've ever done. I'll give you a good story about that, because if you don't mind, I'll tell you a story. So doing all this off-Broadway stuff, so the person that really got me into Broadway was Mr. Shannon Ford. He's my mentor. He's in the business. Him and John Redsecker, who's the drummer of Aladdin, they were really big influences for me. When Shannon told me that I could sub for him at Godspell, I took months, and I would go to watch him play, and I recorded him several times, and I would analyze the recordings, and I would be able to tell you exactly where he was doing a fill that wasn't that he doesn't do all the time, or fills that he would do all the time. And I basically distinguished a track of a perfect take of him doing stuff that he always does and stuff that he does sometimes. And I transcribed that to a T. Now, when I would practice that for months, I had the ultraphones. I practiced with the ultraphones, so I couldn't really hear my drums. I would just be hearing his mix, right? So I'm practicing, and I'm literally practicing to his mix, listening to him playing, and I'm playing, and I'm practicing. And when I first did the show, and I'm listening, now I put on his mix, right? Because I practiced to his mix. But when we started the hit and I started playing, my first thought was, my God, Shannon sounds good. Because what I was hearing was exactly what I had been practicing to. It was literally like, I had been hearing it, and then I'm playing it, but I'm still hearing exactly the same thing that I've been practicing to. And that was the key. Nobody knew that it wasn't Shannon, to a T. And I think that's where I excelled, because I think no one's as crazy as that. Like, I would sit for a half an hour on 5 seconds of music. 5 seconds of music, I'd sit for a half an hour. Now, do I think that's really necessary now, knowing? Maybe that's a little extreme, because now I have a little bit of a different approach, because now I've held my own chair, and I've seen subs come in for Shannon, and I've seen what are great subs and what are not so great subs. And oftentimes, maybe the amount of work that I put in for 5 seconds was a little extreme, because maybe that doesn't really matter per se, those 5 seconds, but the fact that I spent so much time on it helped me in the long run, helped me be a better player. When I look at, sometimes people will come in and they'll play exactly what Shannon was playing, but they don't sound like him, or they don't sound as good. And I'm like, oh, that's not really it. Or they'll come in and they'll play their own thing, and kind of they're playing what Shannon does, but they're so in the pocket, they know the show so well that I'm like, that's it. So maybe it's a combination of playing what the player does, but also knowing the show so intrinsically. And so maybe that was also a big part of it, was listening to the show a million times besides transcribing those 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure those 5 seconds didn't really make a difference.
So since you're a perfectionist, when you subbed your first show, did you get notes? And if you did, how did you take those notes? Did you take it personally, or were you like, you know what, I did it perfectly? What are you talking about?
Sometimes it's very difficult for me to get notes. I don't ever show that I'm maybe a little bit frustrated when I get notes, because I try to be so perfect. And when somebody says, hey, that wasn't perfect, that really gets under my skin, especially if it was perfect and they're saying something that I don't necessarily agree with. But at the end of the day, that's not my call. That is not my job. I'm not there to say anything other than do my job. So if somebody comes up to me and they say, hey man, your kick drum wasn't playing on beat 4, and I'm thinking, no way, man, kick drum was playing on beat 4. But I don't say that. I just go, absolutely, man, I will play the kick drum on beat 4 next time, because what am I going to gain? It's not my job. I got very lucky, because I learned that early on, to just keep your mouth shut, that it's not that you can't. I used to get very frustrated, especially in the beginning, when somebody would come in, we'd be playing at I'd be doing a small hit at some club with 100 people, and somebody be like, yo man, the drums are too loud, can you play with blast sticks? And I'd be like, that would get under my skin so much, because I'd think, you wouldn't ask a saxophone player to play with a different reed. You wouldn't ask those things. Just tell me to play softer. And in the beginning, I might have stood up and been like, no, man, I'm going to play with sticks. Just tell me to play softer. But very quickly, I realized, hey, man, that's not the game. It's not my job. Yeah, does it feel better to me to play with sticks? Of course. But if the guy in the front who's paying my check wants me to play it with blast sticks or brushes, I'll play it with blast sticks or brushes. Fine. That's what you got to do. That's the job. So I did get notes. Charlie was the music director. Charlie Alterman was the music director for Godspell, and he's also a very big perfectionist and wants very specific things. So he did have some notes for me, maybe some volume things, and that was fine. When I just nod my head, whatever Charlie said reigned. That was the game.
Did you go from one off-Broadway show, which you started out with the Marvelous Wonderettes? Did you go from that to another off-Broadway, or was it to Godspell?
Those two were basically the beginning shows. And then I was doing that for maybe a year or two before I met Shannon for Godspell. I think I got a little bit lucky, because I think it was a little bit fast for me. I moved to New York in 2008, and I subbed for Shannon in 2011, which is pretty quick. That's a pretty quick turnaround. But I got very lucky with Shannon, because it just so happened that I was working with so many people that summer of Godspell. When I met Shannon, I was able to tell him, Shannon was, after Damien, he was the drummer for Next to Normal. And it just so happened that summer I was playing with every single band member from Next to Normal in some capacity. I was playing with the guitarist with this group. I was playing with the bass player in this group. I was playing with this singer. So they all knew me in all these different capacities. So it was very easy for me to go to Shannon and say, listen, Shannon, your Next to Normal family, who you're very close with, all you have to do is call any one of those people and they'll tell you my skill level and my capacity and what I can do. And so that was a huge step for me, because he had no idea who I was or what I was capable of. But because I networked accordingly and knew all the people that he knew, they were able to vouch for me.
So speaking of networking, let's go back to 2008. So when did you start Marvelous Wonderettes?
Marvelous Wonderettes was probably Yeah, probably 2009. It was
Hmm.
right a little bit, probably a little bit before you left. I remember it being pretty quick.
Wow. So
Yeah.
tell everybody you remember how we met. I just remember you reaching out to me, and then we went to dinner someplace in like on Ninth Avenue, something like that. And I
Yes.
just we just had a great conversation, and just like we're doing now, and you get a general feel for somebody when you meet face to face with them. And like you talked about, some people want to take lessons, some people just want to meet just to hang out, and some people just let's meet because I just want a gig. And I didn't see that from you at all, as far as just meeting just to get a gig. I just knew that you were just eager to get into the scene and just having a great vibe, and us connecting on a personal level is it really struck me. So the reason why you're so successful now is because you have a personality, and you of course you have a skill set that allows you to do this kind of work. But we met, and I referred you to Mo, and you wound up going to Altar Boys, but you did a whole bunch of other things in addition to Altar Boys and the Marvelous Wonderettes, like Heathers and Carrie and Sisters Follies. Was that all coming together at one certain time period, or how did all those shows work out? Was it over a
Well,
series of years?
I think part of the attitude, Clayton, is that you're right. I think when somebody is coming to you and they just want a job, I think that's very apparent. But for someone like me who was obsessed with theater, I just wanted to meet you. People who played on Broadway were like idols of mine. The fact that you played at New World Stages, that was like meeting a superstar. So that was
Ben,
my attitude. But there is different approaches, because I know that a lot of people are gunning for these Broadway gigs because it's like the main gig. But that's not, there's so many other factors. You can't just do it because it's the gig in town. You have to really want this, especially now, because there's so many things that happen. You get kicked all the time. New York will screw you. Like, it is so hard. And there have been times I won the Radio City Heart and Light show in 2014. And that was like a big break. And Harvey Weinstein pulled the plug the day before opening. And there were people in that orchestra, there are trumpet players that I knew that gave up performing because that was such a big letdown. Because
wow.
think about it, they had canceled their entire workload for the summer to do this. Show's canceled, and they were screwed. And they were like, this business is way too hard. I'm going to go teach. It's just, it is way too difficult. Like, you have to want this with all your heart. And that's because you have to be able to pick yourself up. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, screw this. It's way too difficult. But yeah, to go back to Godspell. So after, our community is like real small, much smaller than I think people think. And I think because I was so obsessive about doing it perfectly like Shannon, I think word got out pretty quickly, because then I ended up doing Jersey Boys. I ended up subbing Jersey Boys on Broadway. It was strange because I subbed Jersey Boys on Broadway on a Friday night. Saturday morning at 6 a.m., I got a call from John Miller saying, hey, the drummer on the tour hurt his leg. Can you fly out there today and play the show tonight? I went, sure. And that's another thing that I talk about too. Like when I do these like master classes around the country and stuff, it's just being prepared to just do that. If I had a dog or a kid at the time, like there's no way I would have been able to say, yeah, just get up and go. But you got to make your sacrifices. So that was huge. I started working for Miller. John Redsucker referred me to the Anything Goes tour, started doing the Anything Goes tour. And then I heard about Radio City in 2013, and I was on the Anything Goes tour, and I went, oh, I'll just take it. And I ended up winning that audition, leaving the tour early to come back. And that was the beginning of my career.
So tell me about Radio City. Only time I have had any kind of contact with the whole Radio City scene was when it was in 2006. I was going to sub for Buddy Williams at the First Color Purple. So I got the book and I was learning it. And I reached out to Tom Oldakowski to possibly sub for him. He said, just come on down and check it out. So I went to watch him play. on this big gigantic riser. We're going up and down, and then you see, and when you're backstage, when everything's closed, and I said this on the podcast before, little people, animals, figure skate people. I'm like, there's this a cacophony of stuff going around, but then when the curtain opens, it all works. And then you're going up and down, and then I had to listen to the recording of Tom Oldakowski, and the measure counts 136, 137, 138, 139, and then it's 140, 141, 42, 143. I'm like, oh my God, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard. And then I'm like, okay, should I listen to Color Purple? And it's like grooving like this. I'm like, oh, that's what I'm going to be doing. But I'm glad I did it because it's such a different thing. Just like doing Broadway is different than doing a regular gig. It requires a certain skill. So tell me about Radio City.
That's 100% right, Clayton. But it's interesting because people don't. I know a lot of great drummers that haven't succeeded on Broadway, that have actually gotten fired and stuff, because it is a whole. People don't realize it's a whole different ballgame. And there's different kinds of shows. There's shows like your show, Ain't Too Proud, that's a groove show that's different than, let's say, a dance show. Or like more of a like an anything goes dance show where there's like all these dance hits and stuff. There's like different than Radio City where you're playing with the Rockettes. Also, I think that's an actual person who's doing 140, 141, 142. That's actually someone sitting there with a microphone, or he's recording.
Oh my God, really? Wow.
It's very funny. So Radio City is like it's wild, man. It's wild. It's a wild ride, that gig. They hold auditions every year for the chairs, which I think is wonderful, because I got really into the business because I won that chair, and I think that a lot of people have as well. Most of the jobs that on Broadway are not audition. You got to work your way around and know the people, and they ask you. So this is a nice opportunity for people to show their skill and to try to get in when they don't really know a lot of people. So I always try to encourage people to take the audition. It's hard to get an audition because I know they only listen to maybe 15 or 20 people for each instrument. So they're really looking for people who have this kind of theater experience. When I won that chair, man, I was like, first of all, I was freaking out because I was on the road, and I knew that the percussion book was all Malacat. And Mario DeCutis, who created the Malacat, he's the owner of Alternate Mode. He's the percussionist at Radio City, or he just retired this last year. But I knew that I was playing all the stuff on a Malacat, and I'd never played on a Malacat before. So what I did was I basically got cardboard in my room, and I drew a Malacat, and I would just practice playing on these Malacats, because you have to play things like shaker and tambourine and sleigh bells and mark tree all on this Malacat. We have like stacks of cats. We have one cat for maybe xylophone and bells and vibes, and then there's another stack on top that has like the entire row, 5 octaves of sound effects. When they're all labeled, I wanted to make sure that I was the perfectionist, the OCD person that I am. I wanted to make sure that I was going to nail it when I went into that orchestra room. And so I knew that I marked everything just like how Mario has it. So I was able to practice, okay, shakers here, triangles here. Oh, there's 3 different triangles here. Okay, yeah.
So let me just go back. You auditioned for the percussion chair or for the drum chair, or for both?
So back in 2013, Tom Oldakowski still had the drum chair. He didn't leave until 2015, I think, maybe 2016. And I ended up actually starting to sub for Tom on the drums, because when I won the chair, the percussion chair, the second time, I think it was in 2015, Tom came up to me in rehearsals and went, "Hey man, I need another sub. You've won this chair twice. Will you come up? You want to check it out? I know you play kit." I went, "Absolutely, man. I'm all about it."
So you had the percussion chair, and then you started subbing for the drum chair?
Correct. Yeah, there weren't a lot of people that were playing drums, and I think they felt very secure knowing that a cover was there who was always there on percussion in case, God forbid, anything were to happen to Tom and they couldn't get a sub in. I was there.
Wow. So what are the auditions like? I've never done an audition for that show. Do you have to audition every year too?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Everybody does. Now, there are some years, there have been certain years in the past where they take people. The Radio City has a very strange contract. It's a very different contract than Broadway, mostly because there was a strike when it was a regular orchestra. I think 2003 or 2005, the musicians went on strike, and I guess we thought that it would be effective, and it wasn't, unfortunately. And we all had to go crawling back to Radio City begging for our jobs back. And Radio City was like, fine, we're going to make this an audition-based orchestra. We're going to fire half of you guys, and we're going to continue to fire all the members of the orchestra every year until it's an all audition-based orchestra. So that's why when 2013 I auditioned. When I auditioned in 2013, there was a pool of about maybe 25 musicians that had been in the orchestra from years past. And every year they would just get rid of a couple, get rid of a couple, get rid of a couple. That's terrible, but also it's helped people like me. It's helped a lot of people. Now it's an audition-based orchestra, and everybody has a chance. Everybody has a shot. It's not just you have this gig and then that gig's taken by so-and-so for the rest of his life.
So say, for instance, I'm 20 years old and I can play and I want to play in Radio City. I don't know anybody. I go in there and audition and I get the gig. It's different from you going in, or Shannon, or a lot of people that know a whole bunch of other people. Now, I get the gig. I got to find subs, just any other.
That's right.
Yeah, but you happen to know people that actually could do this since you've done it before.
Yes, fortunately. So here's the thing. So at Radio City, when you win a chair, it's a split chair. There are so many shows at Radio City. There's usually over 200 shows in a season, which is like 2 months. There are so many shows that they make every chair a split chair. So you split the chair, all the shows, with another person. So if there's 200 shows, you're playing 100. So usually, I've never really seen two really green people win the chair. But also, they're not going to have somebody who's really green come and audition. It's just not going to happen. Because you got to send in your resume. You have to, you send in your resume and then they pick 15 or 20 people to audition. So really you have to be seasoned, or they at least have to know that if you win the gig that they're going to be able to trust you to do the job accordingly, get subs and stuff. But even if there was someone green who didn't know a lot of people, they're usually going to be paired with somebody who knows the business, and they can, like, for instance, when I won the chair in 2013, I didn't know a lot of people either. Fortunately, I got paired with Dave Roth, and Dave Roth is like the king of percussion. So he knew everybody and everything, and he just basically took the reins. And I was like, man, I have no idea what I'm doing. Tell me what to do. We're going to do this. We're going to get these subs because they played at Radio City before and this. And I went, great, Dave. Fantastic. Awesome. All right.
So you were doing the percussion chair at Radio City for a while, and then did you ever get the drum chair? Or half the drum chair?
So I've never had the drum chair for the Christmas show, but I've won the drum chair twice for other Rockette shows that they've had in other years. So I've won the percussion chair at Radio City twice, and then I won a percussion chair for Heart and Lights, that's the show that Harvey Weinstein came and pulled the plug. And then there was, in 2016, the New York Spectacular, and I won the drum chair for that. Wow. So that was really nice.
How many shows was that?
So that was over a summer. We probably did 100 shows. It was probably like 12 or 13 a week.
Damn. How many? 12.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. They're 90-minute shows, so it's not terrible because you could do a Radio City. Yeah, we'll do 5 shows a day during Christmas time at Radio City. There's 5-6 shows a day. It's crazy, Clayton. Absolutely. The most I've done is 4. You can't function.
Wait, so if you do 4 shows a day, do you split everything with the other drummer? Like, how does that work out with the other drummer? Like, how do you both get equal amounts of work?
So normally, let's say there's 28 shows in a week. We'll both get 14 shows. At least that's the way I do it. So I'll be like, hey, listen, I'm just going to take every show on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, and you take every show on Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Is that something that the 2 drummers or 2 percussionists agree on, or is it something?
Right. You could do it however you want. You could say, I'll play the 11 o'clock, you play the 2 o'clock, I'll play the 5 o'clock, and you play the 8 o'clock. You just split it up evenly, and then you put your list in, and so then they at least know who's going to be there when.
Wow.
Okay,
so training subs for Broadway is different than training subs for Radio City, I'm sure.
Big time.
How do you because I know subbing is very difficult. Like I said on this podcast before, I can't remember who said this. It was probably one of my subs who said subbing on a Broadway show is like a 2.5 hour heart attack because it's very stressful and you have to
That's a
get it
good point.
right and you got to keep your eye on the conductor and try to look at the music, but keep your eye on the conductor because that's
Yes.
your lifeline. But subbing at Radio City with that click track and the guy speaking and then everything going around, it's how do you train somebody to be prepared to sub at Radio City? The same way, or is it something different?
Well, radio. So here's the thing. So most of the time at Radio City, whenever I've gotten the chair, I try to get people who won the chair. That's how the MO is there, because let's say 15 guys audition. Probably 5 of those guys have held the chair before. And whoever really wins the chair, then they know those other 5 guys are going to sub, because it's just, first of all, it's too difficult. The shows are it's too compact to schedule to actually train someone new. I have seen it done, but it's also hard because you don't sub out that much. And I'm not going to have somebody learn a show, kill themselves for 3 shows. That's not right. So it's usually people who have learned the book before, because it's usually the same book. It's usually every year they'll change maybe 5 minutes of music. So 5 minutes of music out
Ah,
of 90 is just different. So it's usually the same people over and over again to sub, really. And I have seen new people come in. I don't really like to do that because it's not really fair. It's not fair to do that to somebody. It's because it's not like a Broadway show. But you mentioned something very interesting, Clayton, about locking in with the conductor. And I find that to be one of the something on the forefront of subbing is staring at the conductor no matter what, because they're the ones that are giving you the job. You've already gotten the job from the drummer. So now how are you going to make the conductor feel good? And the way that you're going to make anybody feel good in any situation is to lock in with them and to make them feel like you are on their side. The worst thing you can do as a drummer in a subbing situation is not look up and have the conductor be scared because they're thinking that you're going to miss something. You are never going to be welcome back, even if you play a great show, because you're not making them feel comfortable. So I learned always memorize the first 3 tunes. And so I normally memorize the first 3 tunes. So all I'm doing is looking at the conductor. And there's also sometimes conductors aren't actually conductors, because sometimes conductors are keyboard players. Maybe they're a sub. Maybe they're not great conductors because maybe they're keyboard players that just got promoted to conducting or whatever. Oftentimes that doesn't happen, and I don't really see that very much, but it doesn't really happen very much on Broadway. But certainly in the past, I have had to. There's a game that goes on when you're playing drums with the conductor sometimes where you have to, it's not pretend, but if a conductor doesn't really know what they're doing, you have to make them comfortable while actually being in control of the situation. You know what I mean? They may be looking at you to move faster, but maybe that's not actually what they want. And once you start moving faster, they go, whoa, that's not what I want, because maybe they're not so trained in that. And so there's like a bigger picture of knowing what the music needs, knowing what the theater needs, knowing what the show needs, knowing how to make the conductor feel comfortable and putting it where it's supposed to be, and taking cues as much as possible, and maybe even nodding your head when a conductor's looking at you doing something, and maybe you don't change a thing, but you're nodding your head and they're going, right on. You know what I mean? And that's why great drummers can fail, because there is so much more going on besides just playing the music or playing a groove. It's such a bigger picture that you really have to know what you're getting yourself into when you go and sit down, especially on the drum chair. That's the hot seat when you really have to be a specific kind of person to do that, I believe.
you wound up doing a bunch of different shows as a sub, like Chaplin. I guess you were subbing for Shannon Ford again.
Yes, sir.
Nice work if you can get it.
Yes.
John
That was
Redsucker was
John
on that.
Redsucker. That was after Eric Poland left and John Redsucker took it over and I was able to play for John.
What is on the 20th century? I haven't heard of that one.
So that was a show that was conducted by Kevin Stites, who was the conductor of Radio City for the past 7 years. And I ended up having a very good rapport with him, so much so that when this guy, Eric, he's well connected, but I think that was his first show and he didn't have, his first Broadway show. He had done, I believe, Les Mis, and he had done the Les Mis tour, and he had done a lot of stuff with Kevin. But that was a circumstance where I was recommended by Kevin, which is something that maybe we could talk about as well, with the idea that really conductors are now picking subs as opposed to the drummers themselves, oftentimes now, which is good and bad.
Yeah, you can pick your subs, but when they don't make the conductor comfortable, they're not going to be asked back, especially if they can't take notes.
100%.
And they're like, no, I did it that way. So, no, it doesn't matter what you thought you did, even though you might be right.
That's probably the worst thing. My friend Peter Saleh, he always has an expression. He says, is it better to be right or effective? I always think about that, man. You could be right till the day's end. You want a job? Be effective. Do the job. Say yes. Fix it. Make sure it's right, or whatever it is the next time, and make sure they know that you're doing it so that you could correct it and they feel comfortable. 100%.
You went from subbing at Chaplin Nice Work If You Can Get It on the 20th Century, A Bronx Tale, Jersey Boys, Sunset Boulevard, Miss Saigon, yes, Aladdin. And then I remember hearing that you got your first show, and I was so happy for you. Trust me, I'm happy when I see other drummers and percussionists get their own show, because I know what it's like having a show, especially having a show that runs for a long time. It's a wonderful thing. So I'm like, congratulations. You got Beetlejuice.
Yes, sir.
Was that because, not only because you're just a great human being and a great musician, but how did you get into that show?
I think it seemed like all of the stars lined up for that show in particular, because I had been working for Howie Joines, who was the contractor of Beetlejuice, for a long time. I had done the Aladdin tour for him. I subbed at Aladdin. He's the contractor at Radio City. He knows my playing very well. I would say I work for him more than I work for any other conductor. And it just so happened that Shannon Ford, who my close friend, mentor, and guy who gave me my first shot, was the drummer. And it just lined up really well. Shannon was they were working on Beetlejuice in DC. I happened to be going down to DC to do a show down there. I was doing something at the Kennedy Center, and I called Shannon. I said, man, you're in DC, let's hang. He said, oh, I'm doing Beetlejuice, this show. Why don't you come over and meet the music director? We're going to be hanging out at this bar. So I went, I met the music director. That was really cool. And I think it just lined up, because when they were looking for a percussionist, I think it was very easy for Shannon to be like, hey man, Josh is going to kill it. And then for Howie to be like, oh yeah, Josh already works for me. At least that's how I think, at least, how it lined up, because everybody knew me. It probably wasn't that difficult of a decision. I know they had a lot of people to consider, but with Shannon gunning for me, for Howie there, because the music director, Chris, didn't know me, but with so many people on my side being like, listen, man, this is the cat you want. This is the person that you want. So I was very fortunate to have those kinds of endorsements, because it's not an audition. It's not I'm very honored. Our business is so amazing, man, because our community is so wonderful. I feel like we're always trying to help each other, and especially because our community is so small, and that's so advantageous. I always hear, like for the Radio City audition, John Berger wrote me yesterday, and he was just like, man, I love going there, and there's just no competitive vibes. Everybody's just, we all know we're all gunning for the same job, but it's, at the end of the day, this is a 2-month gig. And it doesn't help me to try to sabotage or be an asshole or whatever it is in the long run. I have no problem. For instance, a lot of people wrote me about the Radio City audition because I've won it a lot. I've won it several times. And I could easily be a jerk about it and be like, no, I want to win this job. I'm not going to tell anybody. I'm not going to help anybody. But that's not the attitude to have, because in the long game, that's not going to help. Someone writes me, they say, hey, man, this passage doesn't make sense. I don't really understand it. And I'll tell them, I'll be like, this is what you should do. This is what I think. And I'm honest with them, because the best person's going to get the job. At the end of the day, nothing I say, I could help you out as much as you want. You're the one that's going to be playing it, So I don't have a problem with that. I don't understand the whole like trying to be sneaky or undermine people, and it's just not going to work in our business.
All right, what's the most difficult show that you've ever subbed on, and why?
Wow. The most difficult. There's so many, because they're all just so difficult in their own regard. Each show presented itself its own challenge. Chaplin was so difficult, and Shannon, that book was so hard. And I remember there were things like you had to play like woodblock with your left foot while doing xylophone runs. And I remember at the end of the show, you had to tune the timpani while playing a drum groove. I had to play a bass drum groove with my left foot while tuning a timpani with my right. That was incredibly difficult. And Shannon, I was like, Shannon, you are just a master, man. He is just an absolute master. That's different than, let's say, Miss Saigon. When I subbed for Miss Saigon for Ray, that was a very difficult show because
Ray Marchica, for those people that don't know.
Ray Marchica, who's also a master, they were in a completely separate room, in a back room. And that was difficult because certain conductors do things a certain way, and that orchestra actually did the kind of thing where they would play like how an orchestra plays, where they put it a little bit behind the beat. When the conductor goes down, it's not right with the conductor, which is fine. But as a sub, it's really difficult to know, especially as a drummer, when there's no click, where you're going to place your hits. And so that was also really difficult, especially because there was a little bit of latency on the monitors. So couple the latency with the monitors with the fact that that we're all putting it a little bit behind where the stick is going down. That was a very difficult situation, because that was just, you had to use your ears. So you just had to use your ears and watch like a hawk. But I think probably the most difficult, to be honest, the most difficult show for me was probably the easiest to play, which was Jersey Boys. Jersey Boys is a very simple show. And because it was so simple, it can be very difficult and you can space out. And that was one of the hardest things, especially when it's all, hey, girls don't share, walk like a man. They're all just like doing gun.
Oh, okay. I thought there was like I thought there was a medley there.
I'm just saying, like, for 450 measures, you're going bun, gun, gun, gun. But you better hit that crash cymbal on measure 325. Don't zone out enough. So like that was very difficult because it's hard to be engaged. And especially because the drums were on stage and the drums were moving around the stage and because of that, you have to play differently, because if a singer's standing right next to the kit, I can't blast. I got to be very sensitive to where I am on stage. So not only am I having to be really engaged because the music is so simple that I could just zone out, but I also have to be really engaged because I'm moving around. I have to like, oh, this guy's microphone's right there, I better play accordingly. And so that was a very difficult thing also it had to be memorized. I'm not very good at the whole memorized thing because I like looking at the paper. I love that. That's like my lifeline. So that was hard too.
It's interesting how you describe Jersey Boys as very simple, but it's also something that you have to rely on concentration and focus in order to get through and be successful at it. You covered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you as far as what things a drummer should always do in a pit. Basically watch a conductor. Focus.
And time, man. Time is so key. That's like the most important. I see, and I feel like there's this school of thought now at a lot of conservatories and stuff where time is like secondary. It's all about sound. And I think it's the opposite. I think time is first, sound is second. Sound will come You got to study, you got to work on your ears and getting the sound that you want to hear yourself. But man, time is the most important thing, especially in these pit shows, man. And like, I remember one time I went to Sister Act and I was watching Rich Mercurio play. That man, he was playing this song and I was sitting watching him the whole time. And all of a sudden it gets a little quiet and he stops playing and I hear a click start. And I'm going, oh man, Rich, that's so weird. Like, when did the click start? Did it just start? He's like, no, man, the click's been on in the beginning. That guy covered the click so well. I had no idea it was on the entire song. I went, that is what I'm aiming for. 100%. That is what I'm aiming for. That was amazing, man. I was just like blown away. Blown away.
Do you have endorsements with any drum manufacturers at all?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. I'm with Vic Firth and I'm with Sabian. I also really like this other small company called Treehouse. They make drums out of their home. They might have a shop now, but they make really great drums. I have a hip gig from them. So I also use their gear a lot as well.
I have to check that company out. How'd you find out about them?
That was early on. A friend, actually, Danny Taylor, I think, got me involved. Him and a couple other guys got me involved with them. And they ended up, when I was on tour with Anything Goes, they ended up sending me some kits to just try on the road, some kit gigs to try with rehearsals. And I would talk to them about the gear and, oh, I like this strainer. I don't like this strainer. Let's try this. And they'd send me stuff. And that was very cool. Wild, because when I was 12, it was a little embarrassing, but my mother, she was like big on me modeling when I was a kid, and I couldn't stand it, but I did it all the time. Like, I would model for Guess and Gap and like at the malls and stuff as like this like little kid, like 10, 11 years old. But I actually I did a Sabian shoot for Modern Drummer. I don't know where, I have the picture somewhere, but it was like I was on a drum set and they took a couple pictures of me. And then it was interesting because then they had 150 cymbal shoot right after my shoot. And I walked into this giant warehouse and there was just like thousands of cymbals laid out all over the floor. And they just turned to me and they went, go ahead, take whatever you want. And I went, what? Really? And so of course, I think back to that time, I'm like, man, I like picked the dirtiest, like I found like a 24-inch giant metal ride that was like this thick, and I picked cymbals that were like I would never use now, but when I contacted Sabian, I was like, hey, now I'm Broadway drummer and I actually modeled for you guys in a magazine. They were like, all right, come on in, Josh.
That's great, man. I'd love to see that. Since you're waiting for word for Radio City, you're going to go back to modeling again. That's what I hear.
That's exactly what people want to see.
You're going to have your own line of clothing. Yeah. We should invent drumming clothing specific for drummers.
Wait, they had a drummer shirt.
Really?
That produced different sounds and you could play it. That was like 5 years. I remember seeing that. Obviously, it didn't catch on.
Oh, man. One last thing. How can people find you on social media? Do you have a website?
You could find me at joshuamarksamuels.com. That's my website. You can look up all my info on my website. I'm on Facebook, Joshua Mark Samuels. And I talk to people all the time. I'm more than happy to talk to everybody and anyone about any of this stuff because I'm going to be working for them one day.
I wish you well.
Thank you, brother.
And I'm looking forward to the new line of clothing, the modeling spread that comes out. Joshua Mark.
Yes, sir. That's good. I'm gonna have to send you a picture to put with this podcast. A picture of me on the drum set. Oh my goodness.
Yes, man. It's great.
I'm never gonna live this down. Now everybody in the community is gonna know that I did this.
Man, you should just do a new one. Just do you behind a drum set, 2021 style, man. Just model your own thing, man.
Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, it was great talking to you. You have so many words of wisdom, and I hope people learned a lot from this podcast. And Looking forward to actually seeing you in person and going out to dinner like we did in 2008, whatever year it was.
Absolutely, Clayton. Absolutely.
Thanks again, and we will definitely talk soon.
Thank you, brother.